Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the world of service-dominant logic. I want to explain the difference between the traditional so-called goods-dominant logic and the new management philosophy of service-dominant logic. And let me at first give you some background. The classical marketing theory, according to Michael Porter, for example, or Philip Kotler, is more focusing on producing physical goods, whereas service-dominant logic does not make any difference between physical goods or services and is more a management philosophy, more modern kind of management philosophy. Okay, so the headline is a shift from transaction value or value in exchange towards value in use. Let me at first focus on goods-dominant logic. Value is embedded in physical goods or in products, and the sense of a company is to economically produce goods and then make them attractive in order that a lot of customers buy them. And the only value which is provided is lying within the product. So the physical good is more or less a shell for the value which is provided. And as soon as the product leaves the factory, the whole value creation process is over. That's why we say transaction value. The transaction is over when the product is distributed. And the only value which goes back to the company is the price the customer is willing to pay. And a classical example for this is automotive industry in the 80s. So as soon as the car leaves the factory, the value is provided and the value is all the same for all the customers. Now, let me shift towards service-dominant logic, which says the value is not embedded in a product, not in a physical good, nor in a service, but is co-created together with the customer and provided by a service provider, but created through interaction and so-called resource integration. And I want to bring as a first example Uber to make it a little bit more tangible. There are three actors: the platform, the driver of the car, and the one which buys, let's say, mobility. The value being transported from point A to point B is not lying in the car nor in the app. It's the co-creation between the driver being friendly, talking to the customer. It's the interaction and the willingness that the customer also providing some information about what is the shortest way from point A to point B, also being in the mood to have a little chat, and of course also in the app, which is matching supply and demand, in this case driver and customer. Let me give you some more examples for the logic of service-dominant logic. So let us take the situation of a lesson. So goods-dominant logic would say students are buying, for example, textbooks and material and consuming a lesson. And that's the whole value which they get. Service-dominant logic would say the value is created in an interaction between the teacher bringing in his or her knowledge and experience, and the students bringing in their own knowledge, their experiences from other lessons, discussing, using cases, bringing the knowledge, using it in a situation when they're in a company and doing their apprenticeship or internship, and making possibly also taking into consideration other resources, books, internet sources, and so on. It's a kind of co-creation, and it highly depends on the engagement of the students. The second example would be healthcare industry. So goods dominant logic would, for example, say a patient goes into a hospital, gets a treatment, let's say a hip replacement, and after having received the treatment, the replacement, the customer leaves the hospital, maybe buys some medicine, and then the whole thing is over. He's basically left alone. Whereas service dominant logic would say that the whole therapy, the whole health process is a co-creation between the patient bringing in his history, his preferences, maybe also his knowledge about alternative therapy, and the doctor, of course, having an own knowledge about how a professional hip replacement would take place. And also other actors like nurses, physicians, which help to really push this well-being process. And the value is not the hip replacement. At the end, it's the quality of life the customer receives.